Alcohol and driving have always been a deadly mix, but some DUI crashes are so disturbing, so unforgettable, that they stand apart from the rest. In this video, we're diving into 5 of the most horrifying DUI tragedies ever recorded. Real stories where one reckless decision turned into unthinkable destruction. These aren't just accidents. They're chilling reminders of how a single moment behind the wheel can cause heartbreak, shock, and devastation that lingers for years. It was June 28, 2024, in Deer Park, Long Island. At Hawaii Nail and Spa, everyone was unaware that in just moments, their lives would change forever. Among them sat 30-year-old NYPD officer Amelia Renhack. She wasn't in uniform that day. Amelia had joined the force in 2018, proudly serving in the 102nd Precinct in Queens. Her husband, Detective Carl Renhack, also wore the badge. They had only been married since September. Amelia never made it to that wedding. At exactly 4:30 p.m., everything shattered. A 2020 Chevy Traverse came flying off the road like a missile. The SUV ripped through the parking lot, accelerator nearly to the floor, the engine roaring at 78 miles per hour, far past the legal limit. Then came the sound. Glass exploding, metal crushing, screams slicing through the chaos. 4 people were killed instantly. Amelia was one of them. Alongside her, 37-year-old salon owner Jan Kai Ken Chen, 41-year-old employee Yan Shu, and 50-year-old worker Maisie Zhang lost their lives. 9 others were badly hurt, including a 12-year-old girl who had simply come for a haircut. In the wreckage, amid shattered mirrors and pools of blood, the smell of alcohol lingered. Later, investigators pieced together the driver's movements that day. His name was Stephen Schwally, 64 years old. That morning at 11 a.m., he walked into a liquor store and bought 2 bottles of Montebello Long Island iced tea, a powerful pre-mixed drink. The cashier recognized him. Schwally was a regular, buying the same bottles almost daily. Hours before the crash, he was seen swerving across Deer Park, speeding recklessly, nearly mowing down pedestrians. Inside his SUV, police found the empty bottles. In his hotel room, they discovered another, unopened one waiting for him. And when officers asked him about the people he had just killed, his response was chilling. He didn't ask about them. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he said, "I haven't broken any laws. Can I get my license back? I'm a Marine." His blood alcohol level was 0.17, more than double the legal limit. And this wasn't the first time. In 2013, he had been arrested for crashing into a mailbox and later found asleep in his car with the engine running. His own brother admitted Stephen had been drinking and driving for years, often refusing breath tests, often brushing off consequences. "It's like my worst nightmare come true," he said. "I feel terrible about innocent people getting hurt." On August the 1st, 2024, Schwally stood in a courtroom facing a 38-count indictment: second-degree manslaughter, aggravated vehicular homicide, reckless driving, and more. He pleaded not guilty. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. In the courtroom sat Detective Carl Renhack. As the charges were read aloud, he broke down, tears streaming for the wife he had just married, the life they were supposed to build together now stolen forever. Other families sat beside him, their grief heavy in the air. John Kai Chen left behind his wife and 2 children. Yan Shu had been working tirelessly to support her sick mother and young son back in China. Maisie Zhang never even had a chance to react. Online, the outrage grew. People demanded justice, insisting Schwally should never walk free again. Suffolk County's district attorney said it best: this man had shown no concern for public safety. And NYPD Commissioner Edward Caban mourned not only for Amelia, but for every innocent life taken that day.
I work in West Seattle, and every time I cross that bridge, I have to think about how my brother and his best friend were killed because they were trying to celebrate his birthday.
Devastating words from loved ones who will never fully heal.
The West Seattle Bridge, for most drivers, it was just another ordinary commute. But for 2 best friends, Riley Denard and Ka Thuk, it was the last road they would ever take. They were only 18, just beginning their lives, returning home after celebrating Riley's birthday. A silver sedan appeared in the wrong lane, weaving dangerously as it sped closer and closer. Behind the wheel was 37-year-old Delfino Lopez Morales. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was drunk. His blood alcohol content nearly doubled the legal limit at 0.14, with THC in his system. Witnesses had already called 911. Some even tried to flag him down, but nothing stopped him. Nothing slowed him. And in that instant, the headlights bore down on Riley and Ka like a nightmare coming to life. The crash was devastating. Lopez Morales slammed into their car at nearly 100 miles per hour. The sound of shattering glass and twisting steel echoed across the bridge. First responders later said it looked like the wreckage of an explosion, barely recognizable as two cars. Riley, who loved photography and music, who carried her camera everywhere to capture the beauty in small moments, gone. Kalia, who dreamed of becoming a nurse, the first in her family to attend college, gone. 2 young lives erased in the blink of an eye. As investigators pieced the story together, the truth was even more infuriating. Lopez Morales had no valid driver's license. He was impaired by alcohol and drugs. He was speeding at highway levels in the wrong lane, and yet somehow he had still been able to get behind the wheel. This wasn't a chance. This wasn't bad luck. This was reckless inevitability. For more than a year, the case dragged through court. Finally, in September 2024, Lopez Morales pled guilty to 2 counts of vehicular homicide and 1 count of reckless driving. When sentencing came in November, the courtroom was overflowing. Friends, classmates, neighbors, entire rooms were filled with people mourning 2 teenagers who should have had their whole lives ahead of them. Riley's family spoke of her laughter, her kindness, the way she gave her time to everyone around her. Kalia's parents broke down as they described how their daughter would never wear her college sweatshirt, never cross a graduation stage. These weren't just stories. They were futures ripped away, dreams that would never unfold. And then came the defense. Lopez Morales' attorney argued he suffered from cerebral palsy, suggesting leniency. But to the families, to the community, it sounded like another insult. If he struggled with movement, if he mixed that with alcohol and drugs, how was he ever trusted to drive at all? Judge Angela Craik addressed the packed courtroom. She acknowledged that one reckless choice doesn't define a person, but that night, his choice had destroyed lives and futures. Then she handed down the maximum penalty allowed under Washington law: 148 months, just over 12 years in prison, followed by 18 months of community custody. 12 years. That was all. A man who killed 2 girls at nearly 100 miles an hour, drunk, high, and going the wrong way, could be free before his 50th birthday. For the families, it was unbearable. The sentence felt like a second wound. Justice too light for a loss too heavy. Riley and Kalia's story is not just about a crash. It's about a system that allowed a man like this to keep driving until tragedy was unavoidable. It's about how even the maximum punishment can never come close to the real sentence, the one their families now carry forever. Empty birthdays, graduations that will never come, a lifetime of milestones stolen before they even began. 2 teenagers went out to celebrate life. Instead, they became another chapter in America's endless book of DUI tragedies. And for those who loved them, the punishment will never be measured in years. It will be measured in everything Riley and Kalia should have lived for, but never will.
A 29-year-old man has been charged with 20 offences, including manslaughter and high-range drink driving, after 4 children were killed in Sydney.
It was February 1st, 2020, in Oatlands, a quiet suburb of Western Sydney. For the Abdallah and Sakra families, it was just another Saturday. 7 children walked together toward a local shop, laughing, planning to buy ice cream. Among them were siblings Anthony, Angelina, and Sienna Abdallah, their cousin Veronique Sakr, and 3 friends. But within seconds, everything turned into a nightmare. Behind the wheel of a blue Mitsubishi 4WD was 30-year-old Samuel William Davidson. He had been drinking since morning, beer, rum, vodka cruisers, mixing it with drugs like MDMA. Witnesses later remembered him shirtless, laughing, making obscene gestures as he sped recklessly through Sydney's suburbs. He ran red lights, forced drivers off the road, swerved between lanes as if nothing could stop him. By the time he reached Beddington Road, his car was a missile. In a 50 km/h zone, he pushed 133. At impact, he was still flying at 111. The vehicle mounted the curb and plowed straight into the group of children. The force scattered bodies across 17 meters, some dragged against a fence. 4 were killed instantly. Anthony, 13, Angelina, 12, Sienna, just 8 years old, and their cousin Veronique, 11. 3 others were left broken, one slipping into a coma for weeks. Davidson stepped out of the wreck unharmed. Shocked witnesses heard him mutter, "What have I done? I'm going to jail." The scene drew nearly 200 people. Grief was so raw, so overwhelming, police had to call in the riot squad to hold the crowd back. Cameras captured Davidson shirtless, handcuffed, being dragged away. And the next morning, when microphones crowded outside the Abdallah home, the world expected silence. Instead, Danny Abdallah stood there, broken but unshaken, describing each of his children. Anthony, a young basketballer dreaming of honoring Kobe Bryant. Angelina, his little helper. Sienna, the actress of the family, bursting with life. Through tears, he said, These kids were just walking innocently. And now I've lost 3 of them. But what stunned everyone was his wife Layla's words. Through unimaginable grief, she said she did not hate Davidson. That choice, to forgive, stopped the nation cold. While Davidson's parents insisted their son was a good man who lost his way, the Abdallahs chose to respond not with rage, but mercy. In April 2021, Davidson pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 4 counts of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 28 years, later reduced to 20. In prison, he turned to faith, reading the Bible, clinging to the family's forgiveness as his only lifeline. He eventually met Danny Abdallah face to face. They prayed together. Danny told him about each child. When asked if Davidson should stay in prison, Danny's response was haunting. If it were up to me, I'd bring him out tomorrow. Justice is to have my kids back. The crash site became a shrine. Thousands left flowers, candles, toys, and photos. Courtrooms overflowed with grief-stricken statements. Veronique's mother said, "No court or sentence can ever compensate for what we've lost." And yet, the Abdallah's message never changed. Through unbearable pain, they spoke of forgiveness, of choosing love over hate. Danny's words echoed across the country. There are no winners in this. All we can do is try to find joy in the middle of pain. It was a quiet night on Long Island, May 2nd, 2023. Route 106 in Jericho was almost empty. For 4 teenagers riding home in an Alfa Romeo, it was supposed to be a victory lap of sorts. They had just celebrated another tennis win, laughing and dreaming about futures filled with scholarships, championships, maybe even national titles. 4 kids with endless possibilities ahead of them. But as they drove into the darkness, something was waiting for them. Something that would change everything in a single, violent second. Out of nowhere, a Dodge Ram TRX came charging down the wrong lane. A 6,000-pound missile tearing through the night at nearly 95 miles an hour. Behind the wheel was 36-year-old Amandeep Singh, drunk, high on cocaine, and completely out of control. He wasn't just driving, he was hunting without knowing it, steering death straight toward innocence. The impact was catastrophic. The Alfa Romeo was crushed in an instant. 2 of the boys, Ethan Falowitz and Drew Hassenbein, both just 14 years old, never had a chance. They were gone before help could even arrive. Their friends, Zachary and another classmate, somehow survived. Broken bones, head trauma, glass embedded in their skin, trauma that doesn't heal when the body does. And Singh, he didn't rush to help. He didn't check if the kids were alive. He crawled out of his mangled truck and ran, stumbling into the darkness like a coward. Police found him hiding behind a trash bin reeking of tequila, mumbling nonsense, with blood that tested nearly twice the legal alcohol limit and laced with cocaine. This man had turned his truck into a weapon of mass destruction and then fled the battlefield. When the case finally hit the courtroom, the truth became even darker. Prosecutors revealed black box data from Singh's truck. At the moment of impact, he was still going 75 miles an hour. No attempt to brake, no hesitation, just pure, reckless speed. And yet, when he stood before the court in January 2025, after months of denial, his tears weren't for the children he killed. They were for himself. He sobbed about how his own life was over, as if he was the true victim. Imagine sitting in that courtroom. Imagine being Ethan's parents or Drew's parents, forced to listen as the man who stole their children's futures cried not for them, but for his own fate. Gary, Ethan's father, said it best. "This was avoidable. The state failed my son." And Drew's father thundered with rage. "He gave my son a death sentence and gave us a life sentence of grief." Even Zachary, the boy who had survived, called Singh what he was, a coward, a murderer. The sentence, 8 1/3 to 25 years in prison. A slap compared to the crime. Singh could one day walk free before he even turns 50. Meanwhile, Ethan and Drew are buried, their dreams silenced forever. Online, outrage erupted. How could someone so reckless, so dangerous, walk away with a punishment that light? How could justice feel so shallow when the crime was so heavy? It was February 21st, 2025. On the MacArthur Causeway, 19-year-old Gabriela Alejandra Rios Flores sat quietly inside her Jeep Wrangler. Only hours earlier, she had been laughing with friends at the South Beach Wine and Food Festival. Now, her car had stalled in the westbound lanes, and a police officer had helped her push it to the shoulder. Gabriela, an international student from El Salvador, was calm. She waited for help, believing the danger was behind her. She had come to the United States with a purpose, studying communication arts at Florida International University, determined to build a brighter future. With her were 2 other FIU students, Daniel Khan, 18, and Mudassir Ali, 19. They stood close by, chatting and waiting, but then everything changed. A silver Polestar Model 2 came tearing down the road, its headlights slicing through the night. Behind the wheel was 24-year-old Nicholas Devin Robinson. It was his birthday, and instead of celebrating with restraint, he had been drinking heavily in South Beach. A Miami Beach K-9 officer who had just helped Gabriella move her Jeep saw it first. Robinson's car swerving wildly, barreling toward them. He barely had time to react before the sound of screeching tires and tearing metal split the night. Robinson clipped a cement divider and then slammed directly into the back of Gabriella's Jeep. With a force so violent it hurled the vehicle across another divider and into the eastbound lanes. The Jeep flipped, twisting in midair before slamming onto the pavement. Inside, Gabriella didn't stand a chance. She was thrown from the car, landing on the asphalt near the wreckage. Emergency crews rushed her to Jackson Memorial Hospital's Ryder Trauma Center, but her injuries were too severe. Despite every effort, she didn't survive. Daniel Kahn's memory of the crash is fragmented. He later said he remembered only the lights and the speed of the oncoming car, then the sharp realization that his arm was broken. His forearm was shattered, leaving him unable to stand. Mutasir Ali wasn't physically injured, but his voice broke as he said later, "She was a very good friend of ours. I cannot process this. We want justice." And then there was Robinson, the man behind the wheel. When officers pulled him over, he seemed oblivious. Confused, almost arrogant, he asked, "Why are you stopping me? It's my birthday. Did you get the other car?" Police noted his slurred speech, his bloodshot eyes, the stench of alcohol hanging off him. At the station, he vomited and refused a blood test. A warrant had to be issued on the spot. His blood was drawn and the evidence confirmed what was already obvious. He was driving drunk, reckless, and deadly. The crash shut down the causeway for hours. Miami woke up to the news of a promising young student killed, her dreams erased in seconds. For Gabriella's family in El Salvador, the pain was unimaginable. They had sent their daughter abroad for a future, and now they were preparing to bury her. Their attorney vowed to pursue justice to its fullest extent. In court, Judge Mindy S. Glazer made it clear, this was no accident. This was a choice. Robinson had driven nearly triple the speed limit, impaired on a busy causeway. She called the case serious, setting his bond at $200,000 and ordering house arrest if he was released. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea, buying time, waiting for evidence. But the charges piled high: vehicular homicide, manslaughter while impaired, reckless driving causing injury, impaired driving causing serious injury. For Gabriella's friends, no legal language could capture the loss. Daniel Kahn put it simply, "She was my friend, and I lost her. I hope the state attorney takes this case to the fullest and gives us justice. But the truth is, justice can't bring her back."
This was sentencing day for the woman accused of killing her sister and 5 other people in a wrong-way drunk driving crash.
It was the early morning of February 9th, 2014, in Diamond Bar, California. 21-year-old Olivia Carolee Culbreth, a young mother from Fontana, had given birth just 11 days earlier. But instead of being home with her newborn, she made a choice that would end in one of the most devastating wrong-way crashes California had ever seen. At around 4:40 a.m., Olivia climbed into a red Chevrolet Camaro after a night of drinking. Witnesses soon began flooding 911 with calls. A red Camaro was spotted tearing north in the southbound lanes of the 57 freeway, flying at more than 100 miles per hour. Minutes later, it was seen again, this time on the 60 freeway, heading east in the westbound lanes. One caller warned desperately, "Something terrible is about to happen," and they were right. Moments later, Olivia's Camaro slammed head-on into a red Ford Explorer. The impact was catastrophic. Both vehicles were obliterated in an instant. Inside the Explorer was a family of 4. 47-year-old Gregorio Mejia Martinez, his wife, 42-year-old Leticia Ibarra, their 20-year-old daughter, Jessica Jasmine, and Jessica's grandmother, 80-year-old Esther Delgado. None of them survived. In Olivia's car, her sister, 24-year-old Maya Louise, and her friend, 21-year-old Kristen Melissa Young, were killed instantly as well. Olivia was the only one left alive. Nearby, another driver, 57-year-old Joel Cortez, was caught in the chain of destruction. His Ford Freestyle was struck, forcing him into the divider. Dazed and bleeding, he watched the horror unfold. Wreckage scattered across the freeway, bodies lifeless on the asphalt. Believing he wouldn't survive, he called his children to say goodbye. By some miracle, he did. Olivia, broken and battered, was pulled from the Camaro and rushed to the hospital. As word spread, shock rippled across California. How could a young mother, less than 2 weeks after giving birth, be behind the wheel that night? Investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Her blood alcohol level was 0.15%, nearly twice the legal limit. A 24-ounce beer can was still in the wreckage. Surveillance footage showed her drinking earlier at a Fullerton bar, and this wasn't her first brush with disaster. At 17, she had already been convicted of DUI after crashing into a pole. Her license had been suspended more than once. In fact, just days before this crash, it had been reinstated, with warnings that another violation could lead to murder charges. Those warnings came true. Olivia was charged with 6 counts of second-degree murder. Court delays stretched the pain for years. Finally, in May 2018, she stood before the judge and pleaded no contest. Even Olivia's own mother spoke, describing her daughter as someone who once cared deeply for others, now reduced to raising her infant son through prison visits. Olivia herself often asked the same haunting question, "Why did I survive?" But apologies weren't enough. The judge rejected any plea for leniency, sentencing her to 30 years to life, 5 years for each life lost. She won't be eligible for parole for 25 years. The prosecutor reminded the court that while Olivia spoke of remorse, her defense at times tried to shift blame. Outside, Kristen Young's mother said bluntly, she knew she was over the limit. She just didn't think anything would happen.
Tonight, a driver who admitted to hitting and killing a pregnant woman while under the influence of drugs was sentenced today in Anaheim.
It was August night in Anaheim, California. The streets along Catella Avenue were quiet. For 23-year-old Yesenia Lisette Aguilar and her husband, James Alvarez, it was supposed to be nothing more than a peaceful evening walk. Yesenia was 35 weeks pregnant, just weeks away from meeting their baby girl, already named Adeline. But fate had something else waiting for them. From the opposite direction came a Jeep SUV, swerving dangerously close to the sidewalk. Behind the wheel was 44-year-old Courtney Pandolfi, a woman who had been warned again and again about the destruction her reckless choices could cause. Multiple prior DUI convictions, years of arrests, even a Watson advisement, a legal warning that if she ever drove drunk again and killed someone, it would be treated as murder. And yet here she was, high on cocaine, methamphetamine, and other drugs, barreling straight toward them. The Jeep jumped the curb. In one instant, Yesenia was struck with such force that she was thrown to the ground, lifeless before paramedics could even try to save her. James was left standing in shock, watching his world shatter in front of him. At the hospital, doctors made a desperate decision. They performed an emergency C-section, fighting to save the unborn child. Against all odds, baby Adeline survived. She clung to life while her father was left to process the unthinkable. His daughter would grow up never knowing the woman who gave her life. But as the case moved forward, the story grew even more infuriating. Pandolfi's record revealed a long trail of destruction. Years of chances, years of warnings ignored. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was inevitability. She had chosen to drive high and impaired over and over again until finally her selfishness ended with death. In February 2024, she finally pled guilty to second-degree murder, DUI causing injury, driving on a suspended license, and drug possession. On April 12th, she was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. For many, it still wasn't enough. How do you measure a sentence against the loss of a mother, the destruction of a family, the pain of a child who will grow up with only stories and pictures? At sentencing, James Alvarez stood in court holding baby Adeline in his arms. His voice cracked as he told Pandolfi, "I want you to see her face every single day. She will never know her mommy because of you." The courtroom was moved to tears. Even the judge admitted no punishment could ever fill the void. Today, Adeline is growing, a lively child with her mother's smile. But her story carries a haunting weight. She was born on September 20th, the very same date that marks her mother's death. Every birthday will forever be shadowed by tragedy, a reminder that her first breath came the same day her mother's was stolen.
Breaking news right now. We just learned 3 GCU students were killed in a deadly wrong-way crash this morning on the I-17 north of the Valley.
On October 10th, 2022, Interstate 17 near New River stretched quiet through the desert. 3 college roommates were on their way north for a simple adventure, to watch the sun rise over the Grand Canyon. It should have been the kind of carefree trip that becomes a lifelong memory. Instead, it turned into one of Arizona's most haunting tragedies. Out of the darkness came a silver vehicle, barreling down the wrong side of the freeway. Behind the wheel was 27-year-old Vincent Ian Acosta. He wasn't tired. He wasn't lost. He was drunk. His blood alcohol content nearly twice the legal limit at 0.129, with marijuana in his system. Drivers who saw him weaving across the lanes frantically called 911. Some tried flashing their headlights, hoping to warn others. But before help could arrive, it was already too late. The Honda Accord carrying the 3 students never stood a chance. The impact was sudden, violent, an explosion of steel and glass that echoed through the desert silence. By the time first responders arrived, 2 lives were already gone. 18-year-olds Abana Abi Hoffman and Magdalene Maggie Ogden died instantly. Their roommate, 19-year-old Elaine Hunter Balberti, was rushed to the hospital, but her fight ended days later. They weren't just victims, they were best friends. Roommates bound together by dreams bigger than themselves. Abby and Maggie had left their small town of Clarkston, Washington, eager to start fresh at Grand Canyon University. Elaine had come from Hawaii, the first in her family to pursue college, carrying the pride and hopes of her community. 3 futures that could have stretched for decades were stolen in seconds, and like in so many of these tragedies, the man who caused it lived. When investigators reconstructed the crash, the truth was unbearable. Acosta had been driving the wrong way for miles, unchecked, with nothing to stop him. That stretch of I-17 had no median barriers, no fencing, no safeguards to prevent disaster. Locals had complained about it for years. Their warnings had gone unanswered until the inevitable happened. The case dragged on for nearly 2 years, while the families carried grief that time could not dull. Bedrooms remained untouched, waiting for children who would never come home. Birthdays passed uncelebrated. Graduation gowns remained unworn. In January 2025, the courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered words no parent ever wants to hear. There is no sentence I can hand down that will do what every one of you wishes, to bring your daughters back. Acosta pled guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. His punishment? 22 years in prison. With time served, he could walk free again while still middle-aged. The families will never get that kind of reprieve. Maggie's father said it felt like his heart had been stolen. Abby's stepfather described her as a bright light extinguished far too soon. Elaine's family held vigils by the ocean, chanting prayers into the waves for the daughter they would never embrace again. On the campus of Grand Canyon University, classmates gathered with candles. Morning peers they barely had time to know. 3 young women who had set out to witness a sunrise instead became memories, their lives frozen in photographs and unfinished dreams. And as cars rush along I-17 today, the question lingers in the desert air. How many more lives have to be lost before we realize these tragedies are never accidents? They are choices, failures, and silences that kill.
The man who took the lives of 3 young siblings and their grandfather while drunk behind the wheel has been granted full parole.
It was September 27, 2015 in Vaughan, Ontario. The Neville Lake family was on a simple outing in their minivan. Inside sat 6 people. 65-year-old Gary Neville, his wife Nerissa, her mother Josefina Frias, and 3 bright young children. Daniel, just 9 years old, Harrison, 5, and little Millie, only 2. At the very same time, 29-year-old Marco Muzo was returning from his bachelor party in Miami. He had been drinking heavily for days, even continuing on his private jet back to Toronto. He knew he wasn't sober, but still, he climbed into his black Jeep Cherokee after landing at Pearson International Airport. Later, he would admit he thought he could take a chance. That single, reckless decision would shatter lives forever. Around 4 p.m., Vaughan Fire and Rescue received the call. 2 vehicles, completely wrecked, at the intersection of Kirby Road and Kipling Avenue. Muzo had blown through a stop sign, barreling at 85 kilometers per hour, about 53 miles an hour, through a quiet residential intersection. His Jeep slammed into the driver's side of the family's minivan in a violent T-bone collision. The impact was so devastating that over 30 first responders rushed to the scene, fighting desperately to save those inside. 4 were resuscitated at once, but it was too late. 9-year-old Daniel was killed instantly. Harrison and Millie were declared brain dead, passing away shortly after in the hospital. Their grandfather Gary didn't make it either. Nerissa and Josefina survived, but their bodies carried the scars. Their souls carried even more. Witnesses at the scene watched in disgust as Muzo stumbled around, unable to stand, his body reeking of alcohol, his bladder uncontrollably released. Later, tests showed his blood alcohol level was almost 3 times the legal limit. He was arrested on the spot. That night, news stations flashed images of the mangled van across Canadian screens. Jennifer Neville Lake, the children's mother, recognized it immediately. She was taken to the hospital, where she identified the lifeless bodies of her children and her father. In one afternoon, she lost her entire world. The country erupted in shock and outrage. How could someone with a record of reckless behavior, 10 past speeding violations, and even a prior arrest for public intoxication, still be on the road? In February 2016, Muzo pleaded guilty to 4 counts of impaired driving causing death and 2 counts of causing bodily harm. By March, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and handed a 12-year driving ban. It was the harshest sentence in Canadian history for a first-time impaired driving conviction. But for Jennifer, and for the millions watching, no sentence could ever measure up to the lives stolen that day. Muzo's time behind bars was cushioned in a minimum security facility. He applied for parole in 2018 but was denied. By 2020, he was granted day parole. By 2021, he walked free, serving less than half of his sentence. His release carried restrictions, but to many, it felt like justice had barely been served. For Jennifer, the toll only deepened. She revealed that at the time of the crash, she had been pregnant, but the trauma led to a miscarriage. Her husband, Edward Lake, fell into an abyss of despair. He often described his existence as living in a nightmare, consumed by grief he could not escape. On June 20th, 2022, just one day after Father's Day, Edward was found dead at the age of 49. Jennifer shared a heartbreaking message. "My children's father, Edward Lake, has joined our kids so they can play together forever." Her pain turned into purpose. Jennifer started a nonprofit called Many Hands Doing Good to support children living with trauma. Yet every year, she still visits her children's graves, placing their untouched lunchboxes there, writing what grade they should be in, reminding the world of the futures that were stolen. Even after Muzo's release, petitions spread across the country, calling for his wealthy family's name to be stripped from buildings they had funded. But hospitals and institutions refused, including Sick Kids Hospital, the very place where 2 of her children had been pronounced dead. Muzo himself issued a statement in 2020 saying, "I was careless and irresponsible. I will live with this for the rest of my life." But those words, hollow to many, could never balance the scales of justice. It was a quiet spring night in May 2017, the kind where the Michigan countryside feels timeless, fields stretching wide, the roads nearly empty, and silence settling over Ocola Township. But at the intersection of M59 and Argentine Road, that silence was shattered in the most violent way possible. In seconds, one man's selfish decision turned an ordinary evening into one of the deadliest DUI crashes Michigan has ever seen. The driver was 22-year-old Matthew Carrier. He had no valid license, yet he climbed into his car after drinking heavily. His blood alcohol level later measured at 0.15-, nearly twice the legal limit. Instead of handing over his keys, he floored the accelerator, tearing through the township at almost 100 miles per hour. Witnesses saw his headlights streaking like a ghost through the night. He reached the stop sign at M59, but he never slowed down. No brake lights, no hesitation, just pure, reckless momentum. At that very moment, another vehicle was crossing the intersection. Inside were people simply trying to get home. They had no warning, no chance to react. Carrier's car slammed into them with catastrophic force, ripping their vehicle apart and scattering debris across hundreds of feet of roadway. By the time first responders arrived, the scene was a nightmare. 5 people dead, 2 more badly injured, lives erased in the blink of an eye. Among the dead was Candace Dunn, just 35 years old, who hours earlier had stood proudly on a stage accepting Michigan's award for Probation Agent of the Year. Beside her, her mother, 69-year-old Linda Hurley, and Linda's longtime boyfriend, 73-year-old Jerome Tortomasi. Also gone were 20-year-old Justin Henderson, with his entire life ahead of him, and 24-year-old Preston Wetzel, who never made it back home that night. In a single instant, one family line was wiped out, and a community was left reeling. When Matthew Carrier finally faced trial, prosecutors laid out the facts like cold steel. Drunk, nearly double the limit, no license, flying 100 miles per hour through a 55 zone, and blowing through a stop sign. This wasn't an accident. It was arrogance and alcohol fused into something lethal. In court, the grief spilled into raw words. Survivor Albert Boswell faced Carrier and said, Not only did you take this from me, but you took the chance to grow this from me. Michelle Ruard, speaking for the families, told him, I want you to wake up every morning and think of the lives you've lost. In October 2018, Judge Michael P. Hattie handed down a sentence of 32 to 60 years, ensuring Carrier wouldn't see the outside world until he was at least 55. For some, it was a relief, but for the families, it didn't change the empty chairs, the birthdays that would never be celebrated, the grandchildren who would grow up never knowing their loved ones. The courtroom was filled with both justice and unbearable grief, two things that can never balance each other. And in the cruelest twist of fate, Candace Dunn, honored that very evening for helping others rebuild their lives and avoid prison, was killed only hours later by a man who never should have been on the road. Her death, along with the others, stands as a devastating reminder. Drunk driving doesn't just steal strangers. It rips apart families, destroys legacies, and leaves communities hollowed out. The crash in Michigan proves one haunting truth. When someone chooses to drink and drive, they aren't just gambling with their own life. They are gambling with everyone else's. And the cost, as the families of Candace, Linda, Jerome, Justin, and Preston know too well, is far higher than the driver ever imagines.